Welcome to your personalized deep dive. Today, we're going deep into the heart of the ongoing conflict in Ukraine.
Okay.
You've provided us with an insightful article from texty.org.ua,
Great.
a Ukrainian news site which dives into the military challenges the country is facing in 2025.
Yeah.
So let's unpack this, shall we?
It's fascinating how this piece goes beyond the typical headlines, offering a candid and critical look at the situation from a Ukrainian perspective.
Yeah.
We're going to explore some uncomfortable truths about mobilization,
Right.
command structures, and the impact of Western aid.
It really does.
Yeah.
The article kicks off by talking about Ukraine's mobilization efforts and how they've evolved over time.
Uh-huh.
It's interesting because back in 2022,
Yeah.
there was this huge wave of volunteers
Right.
eager to defend their country.
Absolutely.
But now, in 2024-25,
Yeah.
the article paints a very different picture, one of growing reluctance to serve.
It's a pattern we've seen throughout history. Volunteer armies are rarely sustainable in prolonged conflicts.
I see.
That initial patriotic fervor dwindles as the war drags on and the stark realities of combat set in.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder about the long-term implications for Ukraine.
What are some of the specific reasons the article cites for this shift?
Well, the obvious one is the constant threat of death or injury.
Right.
The article doesn't shy away from the brutal conditions on the front lines.
Yeah.
Soldiers are facing relentless artillery barrages,
Oh, wow.
drone attacks,
Yeah.
and a very real possibility of life-altering injuries or death.
It's understandable that people would be hesitant to sign up for that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's not just the danger.
Right.
The article also criticizes the mobilization system itself,
Okay.
arguing that it disproportionately burdens the less affluent.
Yeah.
While the wealthy often find ways to avoid service,
Uh-huh.
this creates a sense of inequality and resentment, which is incredibly damaging to morale.
It's a stark contrast to Russia's mobilization, which, as the article points out, operates under a very different system.
Right.
It can essentially force people into service,
Yeah,
which is something Ukraine as a democracy can't do.
exactly.
It highlights the different challenges each side faces in this war.
Indeed, the article isn't condoning Russia's approach,
Right.
but it acknowledges the realities of their system.
Sure.
It's a reminder that this conflict is playing out on multiple levels, not just on the battlefield.
Absolutely. One of the biggest issues the article raises is the lack of manpower in infantry units.
Right.
It seems like there's no shortage of people willing to serve in support roles, but filling those frontline combat positions is becoming increasingly difficult.
And it's completely understandable given the grim realities of being an infantryman in this war.
Yeah.
They're the ones facing the brunt of the fighting, and the risk is enormous.
To make matters worse, the article talks about this practice of taking soldiers from support roles and putting them into combat positions they're not trained for. Medics, drone operators, even artillery teams.
Yeah.
It seems almost desperate.
It highlights a crucial point about modern warfare.
Does it?
The interconnectedness of different units and specializations.
Uh-huh.
You can have the most advanced weaponry,
Right.
but if you don't have boots on the ground to hold territory,
Yeah.
it's all for nothing.
I see.
Weakening support units to bolster the infantry ultimately weakens the entire fighting force.
The article then dives into another critical issue,
Okay.
the structure of Ukraine's military command, particularly at the higher levels.
Right.
Apparently, their decision after independence to downsize and focus on a small but professional army has backfired.
It's a classic case of preparing for the wrong war.
How so?
By eliminating corps and divisions, those are large military formations responsible for coordinating and commanding multiple brigades.
Right?
They created a huge gap in experience when it came to managing large-scale operations like the one they're facing now.
So when the war broke out, they had to scramble to create these temporary command structures.
Yes.
Called OTUs and OSUVs.
Right.
The article mentions them quite a bit. Can you explain what those are for our listener?
Sure. OTUs are operational tactical groups, and OSUVs are separate operational strategic groups.
Okay.
They were essentially makeshift solutions to fill the void left by the absence of permanent corps and divisions.
But the article is pretty critical of these temporary structures.
It is.
Why is that?
It comes down to a few key issues.
Okay.
Firstly, the constant rotation of officers within these structures creates a lack of continuity and diluted responsibility.
Oh, I see.
Commanders don't have enough time to develop a deep understanding of their units, and they're not held accountable in the same way a permanent commander would be.
Right.
Secondly, The practice of breaking up brigades and scattering their battalions across different areas creates enormous coordination challenges.
It sounds incredibly chaotic, especially in the heat of battle.
It is, the article gives a chilling example of a unit that needed to retreat but got bogged down in layers of bureaucracy,
Wow.
putting lives at risk.
Oh, no.
It's a tragic illustration of how the system itself can be a hindrance.
It's almost like they're fighting two wars, one against the enemy and one against their own bureaucracy.
Right.
And it's not just a Ukrainian problem.
Yeah. No, it's not.
The article points out that both the Ukrainian and Russian militaries have this deeply ingrained culture of concealing problems.
It's a dangerous cycle of fear and self-preservation.
How so?
Admitting shortcomings is seen as inviting punishment, so everyone pretends everything is fine, even when it's not.
I see.
This leads to unrealistic assessments of capabilities and the acceptance of missions that are doomed to fail.
And in a war, as we know, the truth always comes out eventually, often with devastating consequences.
It does.
The article talks about how concealing lost positions can put other units at risk, creating a ripple effect of failure.
Right.
It's like a house of cards waiting to collapse.
It creates a system paralyzed by inaction and fear of making decisions, which can have fatal consequences on the battlefield. The lack of honest assessments and open communication makes it incredibly difficult to adapt and respond effectively to the ever-changing dynamics of the war.
So we've talked about the challenges with mobilization and command structures.
Yes.
Now, the article shifts to something a bit different.
Okay.
The perception of betrayal by Western allies. It seems there's a growing sense that the West is not living up to its promises.
It's important to remember that the initial response from the West was incredibly supportive.
Right.
But as the conflict has dragged on, the article argues that cracks have started to appear in that unity.
What are some of the specific examples the article gives?
Well, there were significant delays in providing crucial weapons systems,
Like what?
particularly ATAS CMS missiles, which arrived too late to make a difference in the 2023 counteroffensive.
Oh, wow.
And then there's the growing political debate in the West about whether Ukraine should make concessions to end the war, something many Ukrainians see as a betrayal.
It's like they're being asked to fight to the last Ukrainian while the West debates the terms of their sacrifice.
Right.
It's understandable that this would breed resentment and distrust.
Absolutely. And this feeling of betrayal is further compounded by the growing perception that Ukraine is being used as a buffer state between the EU and Russia, bearing the brunt of the conflict, while Europe hesitates to fully commit.
Wow.
It's a complex situation, and the article doesn't offer easy answers, but it does raise some crucial questions about the nature of allyship and the long-term implications for the relationship between Ukraine and the West. That sense of betrayal you mentioned is a powerful thread that runs through the entire article.
It does.
It raises a crucial question about the nature of support.
Yeah.
Is simply providing weapons enough?
Right.
Or does true allyship require a deeper understanding of and engagement with Ukraine's internal challenges?
That's a question with huge implications, not just for Ukraine, but for how we think about international relations and support in general.
Absolutely. On one hand, there's a strong argument that Ukraine's survival hinges on the steady flow of Western weapons and aid.
Right.
Without it, they might have been overrun by Russia already. The impact of Western weapons on the battlefield has been undeniable.
But the article seems to be pushing back against the idea that weapons alone are the answer.
Exactly. It argues that simply throwing weapons at the problem isn't a sustainable solution.
I see.
It's like trying to fix a leaky roof by just pouring more water on it.
Okay.
You need to address the underlying structural issues.
So in the context of Ukraine, what would that deeper engagement look like? Beyond just sending weapons.
It could take many forms.
Right.
The article highlights the need for more targeted assistance in areas like military training, logistics, and intelligence sharing. For example, instead of just sending generic training manuals, Western partners could embed experienced officers within Ukrainian units to provide hands-on guidance and mentorship.
It's about transferring knowledge and expertise, not just equipment.
Exactly. And it also means helping Ukraine develop more efficient and equitable systems.
Right.
Like a mobilization process that doesn't unfairly burden the poor and vulnerable.
The article also brings up the need for a functioning military justice system.
Right.
It argues that this has been a significant weakness for Ukraine.
That's a crucial point.
Yeah.
A robust military justice system is essential for accountability and discipline.
Right.
It ensures that soldiers who commit crimes are punished,
Yeah.
but also that those who are wrongly accused have a fair chance to defend themselves. It's a cornerstone of a professional and ethical fighting force.
And that ties into a much broader issue of good governance and the rule of law.
It does.
The article makes the argument that Ukraine's long-term success depends not just on military victory, but on their ability to build a just and equitable society.
It's about recognizing that true security goes beyond having a strong military. It also requires strong institutions, a vibrant civil society, and a population that trusts its leaders.
It's that sense of agency, again, taking ownership of their own future.
Yes.
Speaking of which, the article touches on the psychological impact of this war, both on the soldiers and the Ukrainian people as a whole.
It's something that's easy to overlook when we're focused on the military and political aspects of the conflict.
Yeah.
But the psychological scars of war run deep.
Yeah.
And they can take years, if not decades, to heal.
Right.
We're already seeing reports of high rates of PTSD among Ukrainian soldiers.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg.
It is.
We can only imagine the trauma experienced by civilians who have been displaced from their homes, lost loved ones, or witnessed horrific acts of violence.
This is where the West can play a crucial role by providing support for mental health services and trauma recovery.
Right.
It's a vital aspect of any long-term support strategy.
So it seems like the answer to that initial question is providing weapons enough?
Right.
Is a resounding no.
I think that's the article's main point.
Yeah.
True allyship requires a much deeper level of engagement, one that goes beyond simply equipping Ukraine for war and addresses the underlying social, political, and psychological challenges they face.
But as you mentioned before, this deeper engagement also requires something from Ukraine itself.
Absolutely. They need to demonstrate a genuine commitment to reform, to tackling those internal issues that are holding them back. That means addressing corruption, strengthening institutions, and creating a more just and equitable society.
It's a tall order, especially while they're in the midst of a brutal war.
It is.
But the article suggests that these reforms are not just desirable. They're essential for Ukraine's survival and for maintaining the support of Western allies.
As the war drags on, it becomes harder for Western governments to justify continued support if they don't see real progress on these internal fronts.
Sure.
It's about demonstrating that the aid and resources provided are being used effectively and that Ukraine is committed to building a better future for its people.
So it's a two-way street.
It is.
The West needs to provide more than just weapons, and Ukraine needs to demonstrate a willingness to change from within.
Right.
But the article also raises another interesting point about communication and narratives.
Yes.
We talked earlier about the dangers of overly optimistic narratives within Ukraine.
Right.
But what about the narratives coming from the West?
That's a crucial point.
Yeah.
The article argues that the West needs to be more honest and realistic in its communication about the war, both with Ukraine and with its own populations.
Right.
It's about avoiding the temptation to sugarcoat the situation or to promise quick and easy victories.
It's about leveling with people and acknowledging that this war is likely to be long and brutal.
Exactly. Honesty and transparency are essential for maintaining public support and ensuring that the West remains committed to Ukraine for the long haul. Overpromising and underdelivering will only lead to disillusionment and erode trust on both sides.
The article also hints at a growing sense of resentment among some Ukrainians toward their Western allies.
It does.
It's a sentiment that hasn't gotten much attention in mainstream media, but it's something we need to be aware of.
It's a complex emotional landscape.
Right.
And it's understandable given the sacrifices Ukrainians are making.
Yeah.
They're the ones on the front lines facing the delirial horrors of war, while some in the West seem to be debating the level of their commitment and the terms of their support.
Right.
This can create a sense that they're being used as pawns in a larger geopolitical game.
And that feeling is only intensified by the delays in delivering crucial weapons, the perceived reluctance to fully embrace Ukraine's cause, and the growing debate about whether they should make concessions to end the war.
It's a lot to process, both emotionally and psychologically.
It is.
And it's essential that the West acknowledges and addresses these sentiments with empathy and sensitivity.
Yeah.
Ignoring or dismissing this resentment will only further erode trust and undermine the unity that's been so crucial to Ukraine's defense.
So as we unpack all these layers, it's clear that the relationship between Ukraine and the West is incredibly complex.
It's a relationship that's being tested in the crucible of war.
Yeah.
It requires constant communication adaptation and a willingness to understand each other's perspectives and challenges. We've talked about the need for deeper engagement, for honesty and transparency in communication, and for a shared commitment to addressing both external and internal challenges.
But the article also brings up another critical dimension to this relationship.
It does.
One that I think is often overlooked.
And what's that?
The idea of agency.
Ah, yes. That's a crucial piece of the puzzle.
It's about recognizing Ukraine's right to shape its own destiny, to make its own decisions about its future. We've been talking about the importance of internal reforms and changes, but ultimately it needs to be driven by Ukrainians themselves.
It's about moving beyond the narrative of Ukraine as a passive recipient of Western aid and recognizing their role as active agents in their own liberation.
Exactly. Ukraine isn't simply a pawn in a geopolitical game.
Right.
It's a nation of people fighting for their freedom and their right to self-determination.
And that fight for agency is playing out on multiple fronts.
Is it?
On the battlefield, in the political arena, and in the realm of ideas.
Yeah.
It requires immense courage, resilience, and a clear vision for the future.
And how does the West fit into that fight for agency?
The article suggests that the West needs to shift its approach from dictating terms or imposing solutions to empowering Ukrainians to make their own choices and shape their own destiny.
It's about fostering a true partnership, one built on mutual respect, shared values, and a belief in the right of all people to determine their own future.
That's a powerful vision for the future of the relationship between Ukraine and the West, and one that we'll explore further in the final part of this deep dive.
It's fascinating how this article from techcity.org.ua kind of weaves the idea of agency throughout its analysis of the war in Ukraine.
It's not just about the challenges they face, but also about their determination to shape their own path forward.
Yeah.
It's a perspective we rarely hear in mainstream media.
You're right. Usually the focus is on the military aid
Right.
Ukraine needs or the geopolitical implications of the conflict.
Yeah.
But this article forces us to consider the war from a different angle, from the perspective of the Ukrainian people themselves.
Yeah, it's a reminder that this is not just some abstract geopolitical chess match.
Yeah.
This is about real people fighting for their homes, their families, and their right to exist as a nation.
And the article's willingness to critique its own government and military is in itself a powerful assertion of agency.
I agree.
They're not shying away from the tough questions or pretending that everything is fine.
Right.
Instead, they're acknowledging the problems and demanding better.
It's a stark contrast to the narrative we often hear from authoritarian regimes where dissent is silenced and any criticism is seen as a threat. This self-critique, as uncomfortable as it might be, is a sign of a healthy democracy.
Yeah.
It shows that they're not afraid to hold their leaders accountable.
It also speaks to their determination to build a better future for themselves.
It does.
Not just to survive the war, but to emerge from it stronger and more resilient.
Absolutely.
They're not just passively waiting for someone else to save them.
No.
They're actively working to shape their own destiny.
And that's where the idea of agency becomes really powerful.
Yeah.
In the context of Ukraine's relationship with the West.
Yeah.
It's not about the West imposing its will or dictating the terms of engagement.
Right.
It's about recognizing Ukraine's right to make its own choices, even if those choices don't always align perfectly with Western preferences.
It's about respecting their agency, not trying to control them.
Precisely. And that requires a fundamental shift in mindset.
I'd agree.
On both sides.
Yeah.
The West needs to move away from a paternalistic approach and embrace a true partnership, one where Ukraine has a voice at the table and their perspectives are valued.
And for Ukraine, it's about being clear and assertive.
Yes.
And communicating their needs and their vision for the future.
I think so.
It's a two-way street. But ultimately, it's about empowering Ukrainians to take ownership of their own fate.
The article lays out a framework for that kind of partnership.
What's it?
One that goes beyond transactional aid and focuses on deeper collaboration, shared values, and a genuine commitment to a common future.
It's a powerful vision. And it challenges us to rethink how we approach international relations and support for countries in crisis.
I agree.
It's not about imposing our own solutions, but about empowering others to find their own path.
And that's ultimately what this conflict boils down to.
Is it?
A fight for freedom, for self-determination.
Yeah.
For the right of a people to choose their own destiny.
Right.
It's a fight that resonates far beyond the borders of Ukraine.
Yeah.
It's a fight for the very soul of democracy and the values we hold dear.
This article from texty.org.ua has been incredibly insightful.
It has.
It's given us a deeper understanding of the challenges Ukraine faces.
Absolutely.
But more importantly, it's highlighted the resilience, the determination, and the agency of the Ukrainian people.
It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times,
Yeah.
hope and agency can prevail. And that's perhaps the most powerful takeaway from this deep dive.
As we continue to follow the events in Ukraine, let's remember that this is not just some distant conflict.
Right.
It's a fight for the future of democracy and the values we hold dear.
Absolutely.
And it's a fight that deserves our unwavering support, not just in the form of weapons and aid,
Yeah.
but in the form of understanding empathy and a deep respect for the agency of the Ukrainian people.
Well said until our next deep dive.
Yeah.
Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep seeking those deeper truths that lie beneath the surface.